Well, members of Israel's war cabinet have toured northern Gaza. They've been meeting soldiers taking part in the ground offensive on the Strip. Israeli military video shows Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and Emergency Minister Benny Gantz talking to troops. Alan Fisher's in occupied East Jerusalem for us. I understand that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been speaking in the last few minutes or so. What's he been saying?
Just in the last 15 minutes, he's gone into a cabinet meeting in Tel Aviv. He addressed the media, as he often does on a Sunday. He said that the war exerts heavy costs, and there's just simply no escape from that. And that comes after what has been a very difficult weekend in particular for the Israeli army. What was interesting was what followed next. He said, "We do not yield to international pressure. We have made this decision to continue the war alone." Now, he said something similar in the past, but given his conversation with Joe Biden on Saturday evening, and Joe Biden said that that was a private conversation rather than being on the record with a lot of the readout, there will be questions about exactly what was said in that conversation now. There'll be question marks about whether or not Joe Biden put more pressure on the Israelis to try and move to the next stage of the war sooner rather than later. We've certainly heard it from US officials over the last 2 weeks. This was Joe Biden weighing in just a day or two before Christmas. And perhaps Benjamin Netanyahu's comments reflect perhaps an air of frustration with Joe Biden. That's something that may well come out over the next 48 hours or so. And he said they will continue fighting until they reach their war goals, which of course is to eliminate Hamas, to return all the people who are being held captive, and to create a situation where Gaza no longer poses a security threat to Israel.
Alan, all of this coming after more Israeli soldier deaths. What are you hearing there about that?
Well, even just in the last hour, we've had confirmation that another soldier died on Saturday. That takes the number of Israeli soldiers who died in operations in Gaza over Friday and Saturday to 14. We know how some of them died. 4 were killed when they were hit by a guided missile in their armoured vehicle. We know that a number were killed by explosive devices. And there has been intense fighting in both northern and southern Gaza. And so this is part of the ongoing operation by the Israelis. What is clear is that while they say in northern and central Gaza they're exerting a level of military control, they are still fighting very fiercely. In fact, the Israeli army spokesman said on Saturday evening that they were finding some of the situations quite intense. And there were fierce clashes. In some places we are being told that not only are they street to street or building to building, they're actually face to face. But the fact that 14 Israeli soldiers have died in the last 24, 48 hours certainly adds a new light to Benjamin Netanyahu's comments as he went into that cabinet meeting about the price that Israel is having to bear for launching this war in Gaza.
Alan, thanks very much. Alan Fisher in occupied East Jerusalem. I want to bring in Akiva Eldar. He's a political analyst. He's joining us now from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Is Israel's military reflecting the reputation, going by what is happening on the ground in Gaza, that it had before the war began?
Actually, last time that Israel had to pay with so many fatalities was in the war in southern Lebanon 18 years ago. This is very different from the Yom Kippur War or the 6 Days War. The Israeli soldiers have actually to fight from house to house. It's an urban, very crowded area. To be very careful not to target one of the hostages, like what happened last week, and to avoid friendly fire. 20% of the fatalities in this war were Israeli victims of their colleagues who were not sure if what they see around the wall or in the house where Palestinian militants, Hamas militants are hiding are their colleagues or an ambush of the Hamas. The question should be what Israel can do to avoid it, to avoid more fatalities. And to do this, Israel will have to strike more from the air. And this, of course, will cause more fatalities of Palestinian, innocent Palestinian. And your reporter just mentioned the number of fatalities. And then Israel has to look outside to the international community, to the United States, to the UN, and how long can Israel afford in the international arena to take this kind of criticism that it's taking now.
Given that what you've just said is that in order to try to avoid the level of Israeli fatalities increasing, it would have to continue the aerial bombardments, which, as you've mentioned, is predominantly against what the US and other foreign governments are demanding. How difficult a situation is Israel's military particularly, but also its political wing, finding itself, because it has to balance the deaths of young Israeli conscripts in the main against the longer-term objectives?
Indeed, Rob, you have to ask yourself, why now? Why didn't Israel do this boots on the ground in the previous escalations in Gaza? And the answer is October 7th. The Israeli public opinion is willing now to accept more fatalities, and we didn't mention thousands of Israelis who will be handicapped, who lost their legs or lost their hands, and we are talking about maybe more than 2,000 Israelis, young Israelis. And this is a kind of a war of revenge that Israel at this time, the Israeli public, is willing to sacrifice because they believe that this is what it takes to put an end and to make sure that the massacre that happened in October will not happen again. And the other thing is that Prime Minister Netanyahu has managed to convince, I believe, too many Israelis that in order to get the hostages back, you need to use more power. This is the only language that the Hamas militants understand. And
forgive me for interrupting you, but I do want to ask you about that particular point. The stated goal, as Alan was mentioning before, was of the Israeli military and the Israeli government was to destroy Hamas and get the captives back. Destroying Hamas, to those of us watching outside, seems to be becoming increasingly difficult and is putting a larger number of Israeli soldiers at risk because the strategy appears to be changing on the ground. But at the same time, that almost seems to put to one side the determination to get the captives back. And yet the pressure within Israel seems to be to get the captives back first. Is there a disconnect in the Israeli government, particularly, about the goals of what they're trying to achieve?
Well, as the lobby of the families of the captives have stated yesterday in a rally in Tel Aviv, is that the government does not put the hostages, the fate of the hostages on top of their agenda. That actually what they say is that Netanyahu doesn't care about them. And I believe that the time is running and time is, the clock is ticking against the captives. It's now winter and they're freezing there. There are old people. There are young women there. And every day that passes, we know that what we have to add to the number of soldiers who are victims of this war, we will have to add to the list another victim of October 7th. One more captive, two more captives, and the Israeli public now really believes, and this is changing because we will see more and more demonstration, believes that there is no other way. And as long as Netanyahu, and this is very important, is getting a green light from the United States. There are no sanctions. What we get is, in the best case, is a call for humanitarian corridor and to stop the air raids. But, you know, the boss, the big boss, President Biden, is telling the Israeli public that Netanyahu is doing what it needs to do.
Akiva Eldar from Tel Aviv, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Thank you, Rob.